What's up, my beautiful people? Exile451 here with another daily dose of Reddit Hope and Happy, and today we're heading back to boot camp with r/AskReddit, where Mr. Fluffy can make your life a living nightmare. So, let's get to it. Okay, so the question was, military Redditors, when you were in boot camp, what was the funniest thing you ever heard one of your drill sergeants say? Retelling the Mr. Fluffy story at another Redditor's request. One of the first days in basic, a guy in my platoon was standing at attention while having his room inspected by the instructor. It didn't matter how nice his room was because there was a large piece of fuzz/fluff on his shirt that immediately drew the sergeant's attention. Imagine a female French-Canadian sergeant. "Recruit Bloggins, what is that on your shirt? Is that a fluffy?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Why is there a fluffy on your shirt, Bloggins?" "I must have missed it, Sergeant." "Missed it? It is so huge, how did you miss such a big fluffy?" She picks it off of him. "Hold out your hand." He holds out his hand and she places it in his palm. "This is Mr. Fluffy. Find a home for him, like a pill bottle or something. From now on, whenever I want to see Mr. Fluffy, you must bring him to me." And so for the rest of basic, every time the sergeant found a piece of fuzz, she would yell out, "Mr. Fluffy!" And Bloggins would have to march over to her and present Mr. Fluffy, and she would formally hand him the new piece of fuzz to add to Mr. Fluffy. There was hell to pay if he didn't have Mr. Fluffy with him at all times. Oh my gosh. Mr. Fluffy. By the way, I apologize if I slipped in and out of accent on that. My wife was saying this morning that I tend to do that when I try to do drill sergeant, so yeah. We were marching back from our mock PT test and the tornado sirens began to go off. Navy boot camp is in Illinois. And we took to our right and there's a tornado forming a couple football fields away in the middle of the base. Our RDC, who was already irritated by our failure to line up in time, starts yelling for us to run, and two whole divisions of about 180 people break formation and begin to run to our barracks for our lives. At the time, it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. But in hindsight, it was actually pretty funny because the RDC caught a lot of crap from other RDCs for doing that. He would explain to us, what the frick was I supposed to do? Keep you idiots in rank? Am I supposed to tell you, oh no, stay in formation, keep marching? Frick no, I'm not trying to die in this crap hole. Well, at least he's honest. Follow up on that one. My basic was in Missouri and we had tornadoes the whole time I was there. I had one drill sergeant who was terrified of them. One night, he comes bursting into the female bay where we were sleeping. He had his Kevlar in one hand and he peered out the window muttering to himself. He clearly wasn't stable, but it was funny to us. He just starts shouting all of a sudden that we have to get up and get our Kevlars and we're making a run for it. The building we're in is just a crappy metal building with big bay areas. We had to run across the lawn and up a hill to make it to a brick building that was safer. He was yelling pretty much the same way yours was, telling us to run faster. I'm from a place that gets tornadoes often. It was really funny to me at the time. The sky wasn't green enough yet to cause tornadoes, but he was freaking out. Later on, we were trying to do the last field exercise before we'd graduate, but we couldn't because we got out to the field site and a tornado started forming above us, and we had to be evacuated to that same brick building. Today I learned that the sky goes green before tornadoes. Did not know that. A recruit interrupted the chief to say, "Chief, there's a bunny rabbit behind you." Chief looked like his brain had actually shorted out, then responded, "Is it armed?" Edit, there was a rabbit behind the chief. Chief went off on how the recruit must be from New York City because he'd never seen a rabbit before. Then he sarcastically complimented the recruit on his eagle-eyed awareness of the Al-Qaeda killer attack rabbit. Not necessarily funny, but my DL put the whole no such thing as a stupid question thing perfectly. He told us, there's no such thing as a stupid question, but some questions come with push-ups. I'm gonna have to start using that. I posted about this a year ago. Hope it still holds up. Ah yes, the pinecone incident. So I was at basic in Fort Benning, and we were zeroing our weapons as a company. Zeroing a weapon is when you ensure it shoots where you want it to by shooting a paper target repeatedly. Sounds easy enough. Now, I am a terrible shot. I know this. Everyone knows this. However, I get even worse when I'm being screamed at. I spent hours on the line unit. Finally, there were only 4 of us cats who hadn't gotten a go in the whole company. We had 3 more hours of range time, and if we failed to 0, we'd be recycled. Recycled entails having to revert to another company earlier along in basic training. So not only do you lose your buddies, but you catch a couple extra weeks of training with a unit that knows you're a crap bird or some sort. So, a fate worse than death. After another unsuccessful grouping, my drill sergeant, without a word, picked me up from the prone position and stood me up. He looked at me and said, "Go find me a pine cone." Confused, I took 4 steps, scooped up a pine cone, and took it back to him. I presented him my findings, and he responded, "Private, that's not my pine cone. Go find me my freaking pine cone." Keep in mind, this is a forest in Georgia. There's a metric crap ton of pine cones. So I jog off and work on my mission. This entire time, the drill sergeant is shooting all my rounds off, genuinely enjoying himself. Every pine cone I bring to him is not his pine cone. This continued for about 15 minutes while the rest of the company, sitting in a clearing eating MREs, cheered me on. Finally, I breathlessly run and hand him another pine cone and about to jog off to grab another one. He looks at me, then the pine cone, then me. "Steve!" he yells. "You found Steve, Private." I kid you not, I had never been more relieved in my entire life. Until his face scrunched into a grimace. "Wait, Private, where's his family? Who the frick takes a pine cone away from his family?" So terrified, I spend around half an hour scavenging for appropriate-sized pine cones, while he fires maniacally. Eventually, I hunt down his wife and his 2 kids. At one point, I brought Steve's estranged son, Dennis, and I needed to do push-ups for causing Steve emotional duress. Anyway, he lets me fire after I prop up the family to cheer me on. I go prone and I zero in on the first iteration. He picks me up again, cracks the only smile I ever saw from him, and says, "It was all in your head, you idiot. Good job. Now go do push-ups till I'm tired." He also had me write my congressman later that day to apologize for wasting taxpayer money on bullets. Fort Benning. Never again. TLDR, a pine cone saved my military career. And screw Dennis. Where do they come up with this stuff? Seriously. But I mean, obviously it works because that drill sergeant got him out of his own head and he was able to do something. Frick. My battle buddy and I were ordered to dig holes. So when we were about to the waist, the drill sergeant proceeded to turn on a hose. He started to fill the holes with water and told us to stay in the hole. Another drill sergeant walks by and asks him what he's doing. He says, "I'm watering my petunias." Follow up to that one though. We had this awesome staff sergeant in AIT who brought a sledgehammer he named Mjolnir everywhere with him. If he caught you screwing up, he would hand you the hammer and tell you to go dig a hole with it. Oh my gosh. To be clear, I have the utmost respect for the military. This is a job I know I could never do. It's just kind of fun to laugh at the stories you guys share about going through boot camp. And if anyone watching this video has any funny boot camp stories yourself, go ahead and drop a comment. I'd love to hear it. We came back from a run one night when it was just starting to snow. When we got back, we saw all our bunks and lockers had been thrown out. I, being not the smartest private, said, "I could have sworn I made my bed." Drill sergeant was behind me. I painted a fence at midnight in the snow for 3 hours. I almost cried for all 3. I left MEPS with a guy from my hometown that I had went to high school with, and we got assigned to the same flight. Drill sergeant heard me call him by his first name and gave me the whole speech about how, if you're so comfortable with each other, why don't you hold each other's hands? We stood there and stared at him blankly for a minute. Then he seriously made us hold hands for the rest of the freaking day. Yeah, I bet that made that day difficult. I had 2 guys in my basic flight, AF, who were friends before the service. They mailed each other letters while they were in basic, like 6 bunks down from one another. Our MTI figured it out at mail call one day and just stared at them with a blank expression for about 30 seconds. When I was in basic, the 3 drill sergeants from my platoon were all black, and we had a few racial incidents. The biggest offender was this dirtbag, overweight, underachieving guy who we'll call Pierce. Upon receiving punishment for one of his many screw-ups, Pierce let loose some racial slurs, and that was the last line. While Pierce and his unlucky battle buddy were getting the dog crap smoked out of them in front of the whole platoon, The drill sergeants were spitballing some ideas to resolve his behavior. Their solution was glorious. At the time in Army Basic, probably still today, every soldier had an assigned battle buddy, someone to share accountability and responsibility with. My company took this very seriously. We happened to have 2 very driven, very athletic, very tall, and large black soldiers in the platoon as well. The platoon also happened to have an odd number of soldiers. There was a change in buddy assignments, and from that day until graduation, everywhere Pierce went, he was to be in Oreo formation, with each of the upstanding black soldiers on either side of him, sharing accountability for his actions. They were colloquially referred to as the Oreo by even the leadership after a while. By graduation, Pierce had mostly turned around and was made into a person more worthy of wearing the uniform. That's actually not a bad idea. That is quite the way to turn an opinion around. Frick. I was in the USAF basic training from November 2002 until the end of December. One of the TIs in a different flight in my squadron would do this thing where he'd want his flight to do war cries. We'd all be out in formations, and this flight was all just screaming bloody murder for no reason. At one point, a few weeks in, this happened. I was an element leader at the front of my formation, and as they were yelling, my TI and I locked eyes and smirked at each other. My TI, "Trainee OP, come here." I walked over and stood before him at attention. He leaned into me and whispered, "I will ask you loudly to give me a war cry. I want the wimpiest, girliest shout you can muster." I smiled and nodded. "Trainee OP, let me hear your war cry." I shouted, letting my voice crack and waver. He nodded and smiled, and I returned to my formation. The war cries stopped the rest of the time I was in basic. I gotta wonder if these are like games drill instructors play with each other. Last day of basic. Remember when I flipped all your beds and tore your lockers apart because I found a nail clipper on the floor? Those were mine. You never see drill instructors eat, or sleep for that matter. They were godlike humans who had supreme authority over us. Anyways, at the end of USMC boot camp, you have the Crucible, a series of team-building exercises, hikes, and good old-fashioned bonding. After it's over and you are officially a Marine, you have the Warrior Breakfast. I sat down with my plate of food and gorged. I then looked up to see the craziest drill instructor in my platoon with his wild-eyed death stare sit down in a hurry, look at his food, look at me and say, "First freaking meal in the 3 months." Edit, on a daily basis, drill instructors said some of the funniest crap I will never hear again. Boot camp was one of the most fun things I never want to have again. That's the best way I could explain it to a civilian. We were all on the line on Paris Island, and we had to take out our ink sticks, pens. One recruit in the entire platoon didn't move. When the drill instructor asked why he didn't move, the recruit said his ink stick was in his footlocker. The drill instructor made the recruit walk over to his footlocker, bring it back to the line, and shake that thing until an ink stick falls out. The footlocker was closed, and he was just standing there shaking it for about 8 minutes or so, while the drill instructor just kept yelling, "Faster! I want an ink stick!" The recruit, directly across the line from the kid shaking the footlocker, takes out an extra ink stick, waits for the drill instructor to turn his head, and slid that thing across the deck between the drill instructor's legs. And by the grace of God, it landed perfectly under the footlocker. The drill instructor didn't notice. The next 15 seconds went along the lines of, "Faster, faster, dang it, faster, Well, I'll be. As soon as he saw the ink stick, he walked away. Brilliantly done. Seriously, brilliantly done. There's more Ask Reddit content in the playlist link here on your left, or if you want to see the video YouTube thinks would be best for you, go ahead and hit that button on the right. Now you guys stay safe, stay healthy, stay inside if you're supposed to. I will see you all tomorrow. Until then, I'm Exile451. Stay beautiful, people.